I remember the exact moment I realized my life had been stolen from me. I was sitting in a cold, gray prison cell, staring at the steel bars that separated me from the world I loved. My own daughter had sent me here. Her husband's lies, her blind trust in him, had turned my world upside down. 22 months. That was how long I would spend trapped powerless and watching the people I loved smile while I suffered. But the moment I walked out of those gates, I made a promise to myself. They would pay, and the price would be unforgettable. My name is Victor. I am 52 years old. I spent my life building a business from nothing, a small construction company that I poured every ounce of energy, every sleepless night, and every sacrifice into. I believed that hard work, honesty, and integrity would be rewarded, that the people I loved would respect the life I built. I believed wrong. My daughter Claire had always been my pride. From the moment she was born, I promised myself that I would protect her, guide her, and teach her what it meant to live with honor. I never imagined that one day she would become the source of my greatest suffering. The antagonist in my story was not some stranger, but her husband, Richard, a man who could smile while hiding venomous intent. From the very first meeting, Richard had a way of charming those around him, of making them feel special, of slipping unnoticed into positions of trust. I should have seen the warning signs, but love made me blind. Richard had a subtle cruelty, one that hid behind sophistication and confidence. He whispered doubts to Claire, painted me as controlling, as dangerous, as someone she could no longer trust, and she listened. Every word he said sank like poison into her mind. What I thought was a normal disagreement between a father and a new son-in-law was actually a carefully orchestrated campaign against me. I had become an obstacle, a threat, a target for a man who craved power and money, and a daughter who had been convinced to betray her own blood. The day it began was ordinary. Claire invited me over for lunch, smiling as though nothing had changed. Richard sat beside her, exuding that calm, practiced charm that masked everything I instinctively knew was wrong. I joked. I asked about their lives. I tried to connect. Richard's polite smiles did not reach his eyes. He was studying me, measuring me, planning. I could not see it then, but that moment was the beginning of my undoing. Weeks later, the letters arrived. Legal papers accusing me of embezzlement and fraud, charges I had never even imagined facing, evidence that had been fabricated, witnesses who had been manipulated, and a court system that believed the story of a man I did not recognize. I was arrested, my life ripped apart, and sentenced to 22 months in prison. For nearly 2 years, I would live in a world of steel bars, fluorescent lights, and cold floors, stripped of my freedom, my dignity, and the love I thought would protect me. Every night in that cell, I lay on a narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echoes of distant voices, trying to understand how the woman who once hugged me, laughed at my jokes, and called me her hero could have sent me here. My hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the weight of betrayal, from the knowledge that my own flesh and blood had trusted a stranger over me. I felt powerless, trapped, and humiliated. But in that darkness, a spark ignited. I realized that anger alone would not save me. I could not change what had already happened, but I could plan for the future. I could watch, I could wait, and I could prepare. I began to observe, to take mental notes, to study human behavior in a way that I had never done before. Every mistake Richard made, every arrogance Claire displayed, became a piece of a puzzle I would one day assemble. I was determined not only to reclaim my life, but to ensure that the betrayal I suffered would carry consequences. My story was no longer just about survival. It was about justice, about proving that even when the world turns against you, a patient, focused mind can turn the tables. I had become a man who could wait, a man who could see beyond immediate pain, and a man who would one day confront the people who had destroyed his life with precision and clarity. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is proof that justice may be slow, but it comes, and when it does, it burns brighter than you can imagine. Life in prison was brutal, but it was also revealing. The walls were cold, the lights harsh, and the routines unrelenting. Every day reminded me of the world I had lost, of the freedom I had taken for granted. I watched men who had committed crimes far less serious than mine navigate their sentences with resilience or cunning, and I began to understand the human mind in ways I had never considered. Observation became my ally. I listened to conversations, studied body language, and noticed the small, subtle ways people revealed their weaknesses. Meanwhile, outside, I learned snippets of Claire and Richard's lives through careful channels, social media posts, casual comments from old friends, and the occasional news item painted a picture of audacity and carelessness. Richard flaunted his success, speaking openly about investments, business deals, and personal triumphs. Claire praised him in ways that once would have made me proud, now twisting pride into a dagger of betrayal. Every boastful photograph, every smug caption, every public appearance, they all confirmed what I had suspected. They were growing overconfident, careless in their sense of security, blind to the storm that was building beyond their sight. I admit that frustration gnawed at me. There were nights when despair almost took hold, when the injustice of my situation seemed insurmountable. I imagined storming into their lives and demanding retribution, letting anger dictate my every move. But then I remembered the quiet patience I had cultivated. Revenge, I realized, would not be a matter of shouting or confrontation. It would require precision, cunning, and timing that they could not anticipate. It would have to be flawless, unavoidable, and inevitable. Richard's arrogance was a weapon and a weakness. He trusted too easily, assumed too much, and overlooked the fact that someone he had wronged might return stronger than before. I began to anticipate his actions, reconstructing his patterns in my mind, predicting the mistakes he would make, and noting the vulnerabilities he left exposed. Every social media post, every casual business decision, every indulgent celebration became a clue in the blueprint I was creating. Claire's behavior was easier to anticipate. She reacted emotionally, defensively, and always with a desire to protect Richard, no matter the cost. Every attempt to justify his actions, every defense of his lies, every subtle dismissal of my warnings, these were cracks I could later exploit. She believed she was safe, that she had sided correctly, and that I had been silenced forever. She could not have been more mistaken. Then, the opportunity arrived. I discovered that Richard was planning a major financial maneuver, a high-stakes investment that would consolidate their wealth in one location. He spoke of it openly, flaunting it to his associates, overestimating his intelligence and underestimating my resolve. My pulse quickened as I recognized the opening. This was the moment when strategy and timing intersected, when preparation could translate into irrevocable consequence. I began to map every step. I imagined the events unfolding as a series of dominoes. Richard overreaching, Claire reacting instinctively, their empire vulnerable to disruption. The mental simulation became almost cinematic in my mind. I could see the tension, the uncertainty, the subtle panic that would ripple through them when the first piece fell. In prison, I felt the distance shrink between us and the day of reckoning. Every visit from my lawyer, every piece of information about their routine, every small victory in keeping my mental clarity alive, fed the fire that would fuel my eventual return. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also sharpened me. I was no longer the naive father who had trusted blindly. I was a man who had been tested by fire, forged by injustice, and prepared to claim justice on his own terms. Every day that passed, I became more focused, more patient, more aware that vengeance, when executed with precision, can feel like the unfolding of destiny itself. I could wait. I would wait, and when the moment arrived, nothing would stop me. The turning point came quietly, not with anger or violence, but with a moment of absolute clarity. It happened during a visit with my lawyer. He slid a thin folder across the table, his expression careful, measured. Inside were updates on Claire and Richard's financial activities. I read every line slowly, absorbing each detail like a man studying the map of his own survival. Richard was expanding aggressively, borrowing heavily, consolidating assets, placing blind faith in his own brilliance. He was building a tower of glass and convincing himself it was made of stone. Something shifted inside me as I closed that folder. For the first time since my arrest, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a strategist. I realized that my suffering had given me something dangerous: patience. While Richard rushed forward, driven by ego, I was standing still, watching, calculating, becoming invisible. That night, I lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling, but not with despair. I saw patterns, I saw connections, I saw weakness where he believed there was strength. My mind stopped replaying the injustice and began designing the correction. I was no longer counting the days until freedom. I was counting the days until alignment. I whispered to myself in the dark, slow and deliberate. This will not be emotional. This will be precise. I understood something powerful in that moment. Revenge that is driven by rage is sloppy. Revenge that is driven by clarity is unstoppable. From that night forward, my routine changed. I stopped thinking like a prisoner and started thinking like a shadow. Every detail mattered. I reviewed everything I knew about Richard: his habits, his partners, his impatience, his desire to be admired, his obsession with appearing successful even when risk was high, his need for control. He did not build carefully. He built loudly. That would be his downfall. Claire was more complicated. She was not cruel. She was weak. She had traded truth for comfort and loyalty for convenience. That betrayal hurt more than anything Richard had done. But weakness still creates destruction, and destruction still demands consequence. I told myself that I would not beg her for understanding. I would not plead my innocence. I would let reality educate her. The plan would have 3 stages: exposure, collapse, isolation. First, Richard's illusion of competence would be shattered. Then his financial foundation would be destabilized. Finally, both of them would stand alone, forced to face the consequences without anyone to shield them. I began drafting the blueprint in my head, not on paper. Paper leaves evidence. The mind leaves nothing. I imagined every step like a chessboard. Every move would provoke a response. Every response would reveal weakness. Every weakness would be exploited. No rushing, no improvisation, only inevitability. In prison, noise is constant. Doors slam, voices echo. Metal grinds against metal. But inside my head, everything became silent and focused. My thoughts became sharpened. Calm replaced bitterness. Control replaced chaos. This was not about reclaiming dignity anymore. This was about teaching consequence. I imagined the moment when Richard would realize he was no longer in control. The pause in his breathing, the tightening in his jaw, the disbelief in his eyes. I imagined Claire looking at him, confused, afraid, searching for the certainty she had always borrowed from him. That image fueled me, not with hatred, but with certainty. I was not preparing to destroy. I was preparing to correct imbalance. My release date became a checkpoint, not an escape. Everything before it was preparation. Everything after it would be execution. I practiced patience like a discipline. I controlled my tone. I limited emotional reactions. I became unreadable. Other inmates saw calm. Guards saw compliance. Nobody saw the blueprint forming beneath the surface. The injustice had stripped away softness. It had carved focus into my bones. I was not the man they sent to prison. That man had trusted too easily. That man believed love was protection. That man believed truth was enough. This version of me understood reality. Truth requires strategy. Justice requires design. Revenge requires silence. I placed my hand against the cold wall of my cell and closed my eyes. 22 months gave you time, I told myself. Now make it count. The plan was no longer an idea. It was a commitment, and I would honor it with precision. The first step was silence, not absence, not hiding, silence. When I was released, the air felt sharper against my skin, like the world itself had teeth. Cold winter wind scraped my face as I stepped outside the gate, and for a moment I closed my eyes. Not to celebrate, to steady myself. My heart was calm. To calm, that was how I knew I was ready. I did not go home. I went to a small apartment across town, cheap, quiet, invisible. Beige walls, 1 window, 1 table, 1 chair. No photographs, no reminders, only purpose. I began with observation. Every movement Richard made was predictable. Every choice was driven by ego. I watched from a distance. I listened through intermediaries. I tracked patterns through financial records my lawyer discreetly obtained. His investments were aggressive. His debts were layered. His confidence was reckless. He believed success protected him. He believed power made him untouchable. That belief was my opening. The first move was distraction, a false opportunity. I used an old business contact who owed me a favor. Quiet, discreet. He passed along a fabricated investment tip, dressed in enough truth to feel real. A foreign partner, a high yield, limited time. Richard could never resist anything that made him feel superior. 2 days later, I heard he was interested. 3 days later, he was obsessed. That was the moment I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The first hook was set. The second move was pressure. I arranged subtle interference in his legitimate deals. Nothing illegal, only delays, paperwork complications, compliance issues. Bureaucracy is slow, but it strangles ambition when applied correctly. He grew irritated, short-tempered. He began cutting corners. That was exactly what I needed. I could feel the shift, the tension in the air, the tightening spiral of his control slipping. Then came exposure. I filed anonymous reports using documentation that proved discrepancies in his financial statements, not accusations, observations, enough to trigger audits, enough to force attention, enough to make him sweat. The phone call came 3 days later. I did not answer. I watched it ring. I smiled. His voice message was clipped, forced calm. "Victor, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding." The word tasted hollow. The fourth move was confrontation without presence. A leaked confirmation of his risky investments to his partners. Quietly, surgically, one by one, trust eroded. Money hesitated. Support weakened. His empire was built on confidence. I was removing it brick by brick. Then came Claire. I sent her a single envelope, no return address. Inside was a timeline, dates, numbers, documents, evidence. Nothing emotional, only truth. Her call came an hour later. "Father, what is this?" Her voice shook. "It is reality," I said. "Richard said Richard lies," I said calmly. Silence filled the line, thick, heavy, crushing. The execution phase unfolded like falling glass. Banks froze accounts. Partners withdrew. Investigators questioned transactions. Richard's face appeared on a financial news site. Tired, uncertain, smaller. I finally met him in person when he requested it. He looked thinner, paler. His voice lacked authority. "You did this," he said. "No," I replied. "You did this to yourself. I only removed the illusion." His jaw tightened. Claire stood beside him, eyes hollow, confused, finally seeing the structure of the lie she had lived inside. "Why?" she whispered. I stepped closer. "So you would understand the cost of betrayal." The room was silent, except for her breathing. Short, uneven, fragile. Richard tried to speak. I cut him off. "You built your success on my destruction. You will rebuild from honesty, or you will not rebuild at all." His shoulders dropped, not in anger, in defeat. The final step was isolation. No allies, no protection, no narrative control. Only consequence. When I left that room, my hands were steady. My chest felt light. The tension that had lived inside me for years loosened like a knot finally undone. This was not chaos. This was design. This was balance restored. The real payoff did not arrive with shouting or chaos. It arrived with silence. The kind of silence that settles after a storm, heavy and undeniable. I stood in the glass-walled conference room of the Financial Regulatory Office, sunlight pouring through the windows like a spotlight on truth itself. Richard sat across the table from me, shoulders hunched, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. The man who once carried himself like a king now looked like a defendant waiting for a verdict he already knew. Claire sat beside him. She did not look at me at first. Her eyes were fixed on the polished surface of the table, as if staring into it might hide her from what was coming. The air was thick, charged with the kind of tension that makes your ears ring. An investigator cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, we have reviewed the documents." Richard lifted his head slowly. His jaw trembled. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. The investigator did not react. "The evidence shows deliberate misrepresentation of assets, concealment of liabilities, and manipulation of investment reports." The words fell one by one, each striking like a hammer. Richard's breathing became shallow. I felt it then, a release, not explosive, steady, like a long-held breath finally escaping. Claire turned toward me. Her eyes were wet, not dramatic tears, the quiet kind that comes from shock. "You knew," she whispered. "I always knew," I replied. "You let me believe. I let you believe your husband. That was your choice." Her shoulders slumped as if gravity had suddenly doubled. The investigator continued. "These findings will be forwarded for criminal review and financial sanctions." Richard's hands slipped from each other and fell into his lap. The sound was soft, final. In that moment, I did not feel hatred. I felt validation. Everything I had suffered was now visible. Everything they had dismissed was now undeniable. Richard looked at me, eyes searching for anger, for satisfaction, for cruelty. What he found was calm. "You planned this," he said quietly. I waited. I answered. The difference mattered. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer, the weight of consequence pressing inward. Claire stood suddenly. Her chair scraped against the floor, sharp and jarring. "I sent my own father to prison," she said. Her voice broke. "I believed you," she said to Richard. Her hand trembled as she pointed. "I trusted you." He opened his mouth, closed it. No defense remained. That was the humiliation. Not public disgrace, not shouting, but the collapse of the lie in front of the person who mattered most. Richard's image shattered in her eyes. He knew it. I knew it. I watched him shrink without touching him. My chest felt warm, light, clear. The bitterness that had lived there for years dissolved into something quieter. Satisfaction without cruelty. Triumph without noise. The investigator concluded the session. Papers were gathered, chairs moved. The world resumed motion, but something permanent had shifted. As we stood to leave, Richard spoke one last time. "You took everything from me." I looked him in the eye. "No, I took back what you stole from me. The difference is truth." He had no response. Outside, the air was colder, cleaner. Claire stood beside me, trembling. "I destroyed you," she said. I turned to her. "You betrayed me, but you did not destroy me. You revealed who deserved my loyalty." She closed her eyes, as if absorbing the weight of that truth. For the first time since my arrest, I felt taller, not physically, spiritually. Like a man who had finally stepped out of shadow and into alignment with himself. This was not vengeance that consumed. This was justice that healed. And as I walked away, I carried nothing heavy anymore. Sitting alone that evening, I let the events of the day settle in. The wind rattled the blinds, carrying the chill of winter. But inside my apartment, the air felt calm, even sacred. I thought about every day I had spent behind bars. Every insult, every injustice, every whispered lie that had built the cage around my life. I thought about Claire and Richard, and the illusion they had lived in for so long. The weight of betrayal had been heavy, but it had shaped me, sharpened me, and forced me to become a version of myself I might never have known otherwise. Karma is not always loud. It does not always arrive in fireworks or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it is quiet, surgical, unstoppable. It builds while you wait, while you plan, while the world assumes you are powerless. I have learned that justice is not revenge in the chaotic, impulsive sense. It is patience, observation, and execution with precision. It is allowing the natural consequences of actions to unfold in a way that cannot be denied. I watched that principle reveal itself today, and I felt its full weight. I do not forgive Claire. She betrayed me. She trusted a stranger over her father. She chose comfort over truth. She must live with that knowledge every day, and that is punishment enough. And I do not forgive Richard. A man who smiles while constructing destruction deserves the full measure of consequence. My satisfaction does not come from cruelty, but from the undeniable fact that their choices caught up with them. The lesson I carry forward is not vengeance alone, it is awareness. It is the understanding that trust is precious, that deception is always fragile, and that strength is not measured by wealth or influence, but by resilience and clarity of thought. I am stronger now, not because I destroyed them, but because I endured. I emerged from prison with my mind intact, my purpose intact, and my life ready to be reclaimed. That is the power that comes from patience and strategy. I think about new beginnings, about rebuilding without bitterness, but with vigilance. My company, my friends, my freedom, all of these are renewed opportunities. Every interaction from now on is filtered through the lens of experience. I will not be naive again. I will not assume loyalty where it does not exist. I will not let another person dictate the measure of my worth. Life is cruel, but it is also fair if one has the courage to see the patterns, to act deliberately, and to refuse to be defeated by circumstances. The injustice I suffered was profound, but the outcome proves one truth above all: patience and clarity can transform suffering into empowerment. My life continues, but it continues differently, more focused, more deliberate, more aware of who deserves space in it and who does not. I have learned that satisfaction does not require hatred, only the quiet knowledge that the scales have finally been balanced. And in that quiet moment, I feel peace. Not relief from the past alone, but clarity for the future. I am no longer a victim. I am an architect of consequence. And that is freedom that no prison, no lie, and no betrayal can ever take from me. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button, share in the comments your most satisfying revenge story, and subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, justice, and redemption. Every action has a consequence, and sometimes patience delivers the most unforgettable justice.